The silence in her chambers was a living thing, heavy and cold like the marble of the mantelpiece. Ilara, now the Duchess of Blackwood, felt it pressed down on her, a physical weight on her shoulders, as she stared at her reflection in the cheval glass. The woman looking back was a stranger, dressed in borrowed finery, a whisper of a girl lost in the deep sapphire silk of a gown that had cost more than her father had earned in a year. Her face was pale, her eyes too large, a canvas of quiet panic. She had been a duchess for a month, and an impostor for every second of it. Her fingers, trembling slightly, sought the familiar comfort in the pocket of her gown. They closed around the smooth, worn wood of a small, carved bird, a sparrow, its wings half lifted for flight. It was the last thing her father had made for her, his hands, calloused and kind, shaping the simple piece of pine into something that felt like home. Here, in this cavernous room with its tapestries of forgotten battles and furniture that gleamed with the polish of centuries, the little bird was her only anchor to the person she had been. Ilara, daughter of a gifted artisan, not Ilara, duchess of a man she barely knew. The marriage had been a whirlwind, a sudden storm that had swept her from the dreary life of a paid companion to a bitter dowager and deposited her here, in the heart of a world that glittered with contempt. The Duke of Blackwood, Alastair Beaumont, had appeared one afternoon, a tall, severe figure whose presence seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He had spoken to her then-employer, his voice a low, calm instrument of power, and then he had turned to her. He had not offered courtship or poetry. He had offered an escape, phrased as a proposal of marriage. She had accepted. Of course, she had accepted. It was a choice between a gilded cage and an iron one, and she had chosen the one with better upholstery. She had not for a moment deluded herself that it was a love match. He was a man of immense power and responsibility, and she was a convenient, quiet, and suitably well-bred nobody who would not complicate his life with political entanglements. A blank slate upon which the ducal name could rest. That was all she had imagined he wanted. But now, his family was here. They had been summoned from their various stately homes across the country to inspect the Duke's impulsive acquisition. The summons for dinner had arrived on a silver tray that morning, and the simple vellum card had felt like a death warrant. Tonight, she would be judged. Tonight, they would see the plainness of her, the thinness of her bloodline, the gaping, penniless void where a dowry ought to be. A soft knock on the door made her heart leap into her throat, a frantic, trapped thing. She clutched the wooden sparrow so tightly its tiny wing dug into her palm. "Enter," she managed, her voice a reedy sound in the vast chamber. It was him, Alastair, the Duke, her husband. He stood in the doorway, impossibly tall and contained, his formal evening attire a study in black and white. He did not smile. He never smiled, but his eyes, a deep, startling shade of amber, found hers in the mirror. For a moment, he simply watched her, his expression unreadable, a mask of aristocratic control. She saw the faint, silvery line of a scar at his left temple, a tiny imperfection almost hidden by his dark hair. It was the only part of him that seemed fallible. "They are waiting," he said. His voice was not unkind, but it held no warmth. It was a statement of fact, a piece of information delivered with the same dispassion he might use to announce the time. Ilara turned from the mirror, forcing her hands to unclasp, letting the sparrow settle back into her pocket. She smoothed the silk of her skirt, a useless gesture of composure. "I am ready." The words felt like a lie. She was not ready. She would never be ready to face the pride of lions into whose den she had been so carelessly thrown. He stepped aside to let her pass, his gaze sweeping over her, a swift, assessing glance that made her feel like a painting he was considering for purchase. "The gown is suitable," he commented, the words clipped. It was the closest he had ever come to a compliment. She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was tight, a knot of fear pulled taut. She could feel the pulse hammering in her wrists, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence of the house. The walk to the formal dining room was the longest of her life. They moved down the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing on the marble. He walked beside her, but not with her, a subtle but distinct distance between them. He was a planet, and she was a small, captured moon orbiting in his cold, inescapable gravity. He did not offer her his arm. She was grateful for it. The touch of him, she suspected, would be like laying a hand on stone, and she did not think she could bear the confirmation of just how alone she truly was. The dining room was a blaze of candlelight, the long mahogany table a shimmering sea of crystal and silver, and seated around it, watching her approach, were his family. The dowager duchess, his mother, sat at the opposite end of the table from her son's empty chair, her posture as rigid as her tightly coiled silver hair. His uncle, Lord Marcus Beaumont, a man with a florid face and small, shrewd eyes, sat to her right. Beside him, his wife, Lady Beatrice, a woman whose mouth seemed permanently pursed in disapproval. They were the judges, and she was the prisoner being led to the stand. Alastair guided her to her seat at his right hand, the chair a throne of judgment. He pulled it out for her himself, a small, correct gesture that felt entirely impersonal. As she sat, the rustle of her silk dress sounded like a scream in the thick, expectant silence. He took his own seat at the head of the table, and the atmosphere grew even colder, the air crackling with unspoken hostility. Dinner was served by footmen who moved like ghosts, their faces impassive. The clink of silver on porcelain was the only sound for a long time. Ilara could not eat. She lifted her fork, moved a single pea across her plate, and set it down again. Every eye was on her. She could feel their scrutiny like a physical touch, examining her posture, her hands, the simple gold band on her finger. They were dissecting her, searching for the fatal flaw that proved their son, their nephew, their duke, had made a catastrophic mistake. Finally, the Dowager Duchess Isabel placed her knife and fork together on her plate with a delicate, decisive click. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin and fixed her gaze on her son. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held the hardness of chips of ice. "Alastair," she began, her voice cultured and precise, each word a perfectly polished stone. "We have remained silent out of respect for your recent decision, but we cannot, in good conscience, allow this to proceed into the season. The family's reputation is at stake." Ilara's breath caught. She stared at her plate, at the swirl of sauce beside a piece of fish she could not name. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into nothing until she was as small and unseen as the wooden bird in her pocket. Alastair did not look at his mother. He continued to study the contents of his wineglass, swirling the deep red liquid slowly. "The family's reputation," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the length of the table, "is my affair, mother." "It is our affair," Lord Marcus boomed, his face turning a shade darker. "You have a duty, boy, a duty to your name, to this title, this marriage. It is a folly. There is no alliance, no gain. The girl brings nothing, no connections, no fortune. It is a strategic disaster." "I did not marry for strategy, uncle," Alastair replied, his tone still maddeningly calm. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving the glass. It was as if he were discussing the weather, not the dismantling of his wife in her own dining room. Ilara felt a flush of shame so hot it stung her cheeks. The girl brings nothing. It was the truth, the cold, hard stone of it. She was a nobody. She had known it, but hearing it spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, felt like a physical blow. Her hands curled into fists in her lap. "It is more than a disaster. It is a social embarrassment," Lady Beatrice chimed in, her voice thin and sharp like the whine of a mosquito. "They are already whispering. The daughter of a tradesman, they say. A wood carver. Can you imagine? In the Blackwood family. She shuddered delicately, as if the very thought might contaminate her. Elara's head snapped up. She could endure insults to herself, to her poverty, but the contempt in the woman's voice for her father, for his honest, beautiful work, ignited a spark of fire in the cold landscape of her fear. Her father had been a better person, a kinder, more talented soul than any of these cold, calculating people would ever be. Alistair finally lifted his head. He did not look at his aunt. He looked at Elara. His amber eyes met hers across the small distance between them, and for a fleeting, impossible second, she thought she saw something in them. Not pity. Something else. A flicker of understanding? Then it was gone, shuttered behind his usual, impenetrable reserve. He placed his glass on the table with a soft, final sound. He addressed his family, his voice dropping a fraction, gaining an edge of steel that cut through the room. Her father was an artist. His work was sought by collectors across the continent. He was a man of greater integrity and honor than many I have had the displeasure of knowing in the House of Lords. The table fell silent. Lord Marcus looked apoplectic, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The Dowager Duchess's lips thinned into a bloodless line. Elara stared at her husband, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had defended her father. He had defended her. Not as a concept, not as his duchess, but as the daughter of a specific man he seemed to know something about. The Dowager recovered first. Honor does not fill the family coffers, Alistair. It does not secure our legacy. This match is untenable. Mr. Finch has already been consulted. An annulment can be arranged. Quietly. Before she is officially presented. She waved a dismissive hand in Elara's direction, as if she were a piece of furniture that had been delivered by mistake. Take her back. Send her home. We can say she was unwell. No one need be the wiser. Take her back. Send her home. The words echoed in the silent room. Home. Where was that? The cramped rooms above her father's old workshop, sold to pay his debts. The cold, lonely attic room in the house of the dowager who had employed her. She had no home to be sent back to. She was adrift, and this cold, loveless marriage was the only shore she had. The matter is settled, Alistair said, his voice flat. Elara is the Duchess of Blackwood. She is my wife. That is the end of it. Is it? His mother challenged, leaning forward. Her icy blue eyes were fixed on her son, a look of pure, unyielding will. Think of the future, Alistair. Think of your heirs. The bloodline must be protected. My wife's blood is as good as ours, mother. Perhaps better. It has not been thinned by generations of marrying cousins for convenience, he retorted. The insult was delivered so calmly, so quietly, that it took a moment to land. When it did, Lady Beatrice gasped, and Lord Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal tremble. This is an outrage, he sputtered. You have lost your senses over this nobody. Alistair rose slowly from his chair. He was a commanding presence, his height and stillness dominating the room. The candlelight cast long, sharp shadows across his face, making his features seem as if they were carved from granite. He looked down the length of the table at the furious, indignant faces of his family. I believe, he said, his voice dangerously soft, that you have all said quite enough. He was not asking. He was commanding. He was the Duke, and this was his house. The challenge hung in the air, a threat more potent than any shouted word. But the dowager was not so easily silenced. She stood as well, her small frame radiating an authority born of decades as the matriarch of this powerful family. We are trying to save you from yourself, Alistair, from a ruinous mistake. You are blinded by some misplaced sense of chivalry. It is your duty to put this right. Take her back to wherever you found her, and let us forget this unfortunate chapter ever occurred." The finality in her tone was absolute. They were not suggesting, they were demanding. They were trying to break him, to bend him back into the shape they required, and Ilara, watching him, saw the immense pressure he was under. She saw the weight of his name, his history, his family, all pushing down on him. And she was the cause. She was the fulcrum of his ruin. A strange and terrible clarity washed over her. She saw the rest of her life stretching out before her. A long, cold war fought in drawing rooms and at dinner tables, with her as the perpetual battlefield. She would be his weakness, the chink in his ducal armor, the constant source of strife between him and his family. He had offered her an escape, but in accepting it, she had walked him into a prison of his own. She looked at his face, at the rigid set of his jaw, the tension in the cords of his neck. She saw the faint scar at his temple, a reminder of some past pain. She could not bear to be the cause of a new one. In that moment, she found a strength she did not know she possessed. It was not the strength of a duchess, but the strength of her father's daughter, a quiet resilience forged in hardship. She could not fight his family for him, but she could release him from the fight. She pushed her chair back, the sounds scraping loudly in the tense silence. Everyone turned to look at her. It was the first move she had made, the first sound she had uttered since the assault began. She stood, her spine straight, her head held high. She felt oddly calm, the fear replaced by a cold, sad resolve. She held her husband's gaze. His amber eyes were dark with an emotion she could not decipher. She drew a steadying breath, the scent of beeswax and wilted flowers filling her lungs. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was quiet, but it was perfectly clear, and it carried to every corner of the room. "Then let me go." 4 words, a simple declarative sentence. It was not a plea, it was not a question, it was a choice. Her choice. She was giving him the out his family so desperately wanted him to take. She was offering him his freedom, his peace, his good standing. It was the only thing she had to give, the only thing of value she had brought into this marriage. Her own departure. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum in which all the earlier anger and argument seemed to rush and disappear. The Dowager Duchess smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. Lord Marcus leaned back in his chair, a look of satisfaction on his face. They had won. The girl herself had conceded. The situation had resolved itself with perfect, if unexpected, neatness. They all looked at Alistair, waiting for his nod of assent, for the quiet words that would seal the annulment and erase this entire, regrettable affair. Alistair did not look at his family. His gaze remained locked on Ilara. He saw the resolution in her eyes, the heartbreaking dignity in her posture. She was not breaking down. She was not begging. She was letting him go. An act of selfless courage that shamed every selfish word his family had spoken. He saw her for the first time, not as a solution to his problem, but as a woman of incredible, quiet strength. He saw the faint tremor in her hand, the one she held pressed against the table to steady herself. He saw the cost of her words in the pallor of her cheeks. She was prepared to walk out of this house with nothing, back into the bleak world from which he had plucked her, all to save him from the family that was supposed to be his strength. A muscle worked in his jaw. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Ilara's heart felt like a stone sinking slowly through her chest. He would agree. Of course he would agree. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. It was what a duke would do. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked at his mother. The faint light from the chandelier caught the scar on his temple, making it gleam for an instant like a line of silver thread. He drew a breath, and the single word he spoke was not loud, was not angry. It was quiet, absolute, and utterly final. No. The word fell into the room like a block of granite, shattering the triumphant silence. The smile vanished from his mother's face, replaced by sheer disbelief. Lord Marcus sat bolt upright, his mouth agape. Alistair turned his gaze back to Alara. His amber eyes were no longer unreadable. They were blazing with an intensity that stole her breath, a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen in him before. He took a step toward her, closing the small distance between them. He was speaking only to her now, the rest of the room and the people in it ceasing to exist. "I will not," he said, his voice low and rough with feeling. "I will not let you go." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was not cold stone. It was warm, strong, his fingers closing around hers in a grip that was both possessive and protective. It was an anchor in the storm, grounding her when she thought she would be swept away. "This dinner is over," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that would brook no argument. "You will all leave. Now." He did not wait for a response. Still holding Alara's hand, he turned and led her from the room, leaving his stunned family in his wake. They walked in silence back through the echoing halls, up the grand staircase, his grip on her hand never faltering. He led her, not to her own chambers, but to his. He closed the heavy oak door behind them, shutting out the world. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight slanting through the tall windows. He released her hand and moved to the fireplace, lighting a taper and touching it to the waiting kindling. Flames licked up, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room, chasing the cold shadows into the corners. Alara stood by the door, her body trembling with the aftermath of the ordeal. She watched him, her mind a whirl of confusion and a fragile, burgeoning hope that felt as dangerous as it was beautiful. He turned from the fire to face her. In the soft light, the harsh lines of his face seemed to soften. The mask was gone. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quiet. "I should never have subjected you to that. I thought if they met you, they would understand. I was a fool." "Understand what?" she whispered, the words barely audible. He crossed the room and stood before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He did not touch her, but his presence was an embrace. "Why I married you." He looked down at his hands, then back up at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Your father," he began, his voice hesitant, as if he were unaccustomed to speaking of such things. "I met him once, a long time ago. I was younger and reckless. I had an accident while riding not far from your village, a bad fall. I was injured, and my horse was lost. It was winter and growing dark. I believe I would have frozen to death had he not found me." Alara stared at him, her heart stopping. Her father had never spoken of this. "He took me into his home, into his workshop," Alistair continued, his eyes distant with the memory. "He and your mother, they cared for me for 3 days until I was well enough to send for my people. They asked for nothing in return. They did not even know who I was. Your father, he was a good man. He spoke of his work, of the beauty he found in the wood, and he spoke of his daughter, of you, with such love, such pride." A tear slipped down Alara's cheek, hot and sudden. "I never forgot his kindness," Alistair said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "It was a rare and genuine thing. After he passed, I made quiet inquiries. I learned of your situation, of your employment. It enraged me that the daughter of such a man should be reduced to a life of thankless servitude. I could not bear it. He finally reached out, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away her tear. So I came to you. My proposal was clumsy, I know. I am not a man of words, Ilara. I saw a wrong, and I sought to right it in the only way I knew how. I offered you my name, my protection. I thought it was enough. I did not realize I was offering you a different kind of cage. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Pride," he admitted, his lips twisting in a wry, self-deprecating line. "And fear. I did not want you to feel you were an obligation, a debt being repaid. I wanted—" He stopped, searching for the words. "I wanted you to choose to be here, freely. And tonight, when you stood up to them all, when you offered to sacrifice yourself for my sake, I saw that I had been given a gift far greater than I deserved. I saw you, Ilara. Truly saw you." His face was open, vulnerable, all the ducal armor stripped away. He was just a man who had carried a secret kindness in his heart for years, a man who had acted out of a deep, abiding sense of honor and a compassion he showed to no one else. "They all had reasons you were wrong for me," he murmured, his amber eyes searching hers. "I had only one reason you were not." He leaned in, his movements slow, giving her every chance to turn away. She did not. She stood her ground, her heart aching with a feeling so new and overwhelming she could not name it. It was more than gratitude, more than relief. It was a fragile, tender hope, unfurling like a new leaf in the spring. His lips met hers. The kiss was not one of passion, but of profound tenderness. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a prayer. It was the sealing of a bargain made not of convenience, but of a quiet, patient, and deeply rooted love she was only just beginning to understand. When he drew back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will not let you go," he repeated, his voice a vow in the warm, firelit darkness. "Not ever. This is your home now, Ilara, if you will have it, if you will have me." She looked up at him, at this stranger who was her husband, this cold duke with the warm hands and the secret, honorable heart. And for the first time since she had walked into this house, she felt she was exactly where she belonged. Months passed. The cold grip of winter loosened, giving way to a tentative spring. The town buzzed with rumors about the Duke of Blackwood and his mysterious, low-born wife, but the Duke and Duchess were not in London to hear them. They remained at the country estate, a world away from the prying eyes of society. The great, sombre house began to change. Ilara, with Alastair's quiet encouragement, had the heavy velvet drapes replaced with lighter fabrics that let the sunlight flood in. She filled the cold, echoing rooms with wildflowers from the meadows. Her laughter, a sound Alastair had never heard before that first night in his study, became a frequent music in the halls. One bright afternoon, she sat on a bench in the newly thriving rose garden, a sketchbook open on her lap. Her pencil flew across the page, capturing the delicate curl of a petal. On the bench beside her sat the small wooden sparrow. She no longer needed to carry it in her pocket for comfort, but she kept it close, a reminder of the man who had shaped her and the man who cherished his memory. She felt a presence behind her and smiled without looking up. "You are quiet today," she said. Alastair sat down beside her, his long frame relaxing next to hers. He looked at her drawing, a genuine warmth in his eyes. He smiled now, she had discovered. They were small, rare things, his smiles, but they transformed his severe face, and she treasured each one. "I was watching you," he said. "You seem content." I am, she replied, closing the sketchbook and leaning her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her instantly, holding her close. It was a familiar, comforting gesture now. I never knew it was possible to feel this peaceful. He was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the pattern on the spine of her sketchbook. My mother sent another letter, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Elara tensed slightly. Oh? She wishes to call. She suggests that with the season in full swing, it is time to present a united front. He paused. I have not replied. Elara sat up, turning to look at him. What do you want to do, Alistair? It was a question she asked him often. In the beginning, he had been taken aback, accustomed to making decisions alone, but he had learned that she was not asking for his command, but for his partnership. He met her gaze, his expression serious. I want to do whatever you wish. Their approval means nothing to me. Your happiness means everything. She thought of the dowager duchess, of her cold eyes and cruel words. The memory no longer held the power to wound her. She was not the frightened girl cowering at a dinner table. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, beloved wife of a good man. She was secure. She was home. Then let her come, Elara said, her voice steady and sure. Let them all come. This is our home. We will receive them. And they will see. See what? He asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. That her son is happy, she said softly, reaching up to trace the faint scar at his temple. And that his wife is not going anywhere. His smile broadened. He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the comfortable intimacy they had built day by day. It was a love that had not been born of a fiery passion, but had grown quietly, like a seed planted in stony ground, pushing its way toward the sun. It was patient and quiet, and it was more than enough. It was everything.